This is Agenda Awani with me, Nala Huda. And today we turn our attention to our closest neighbour, Singapore, where the general election 2025 has just concluded with the People's Action Party PAP securing an enhanced mandate under the leadership of Prime Minister Lawrence Wong. And despite some domestic political challenges and global uncertainty, the PAP has managed to solidify its position, while the Workers' Party, the opposition, has also strengthened and solidified its role as the main challenger. What contributed to this outcome, and what can we expect to come after this with Singapore and its renewed mandate, its role within ASEAN, as well as its relations with major powers and neighbours such as Malaysia? To discuss and unpack the key takeaways from Singapore's general election 2025, joining us we have Dr. Mustafa Izzuddin, Senior Political Analyst at Solaris Strategies Singapore. Thank you so much, Dr. Mustafa, for joining us today. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
We want to first look at the PAP, of course, not just looking at the landslide win, but we're also witnessing their share of the popular vote rising from about 61% to 65% from the previous election to this time around. What do you make of this? It's quite a significant increase.
I think that's quite significant, because any percentage, right, that you have a rise in popular vote is very difficult to achieve. So to achieve 4 percentage points, it's actually quite exceptional. And 65% in Singapore context can be considered a very strong mandate.
Yeah, this mandate that you say is what a lot of people have been saying to describe the general election as a sort of a litmus test towards, of course, Prime Minister Lawrence Wong and his first year in office, his government handling all these challenges in the past year. What do you make of this?
The Prime Minister was seeking a strong mandate, and that's exactly what the voters have given him. Then he wanted to start off his Prime Ministership. This is the first election as Prime Minister on a high note. And that's exactly what has happened with the election result. So I think overwhelmingly, many people in Singapore, those who can vote, have decided to give him the mandate that he had sought. And I think it's important for him to get that mandate so that he can steer Singapore both domestically as well as internationally.
So for Lawrence Wong and his government, what do you think they should take away from this election, and also reflecting on the past year?
I think they can take away from this election that the people are behind them. They want a strong government, and they want the government to listen to the people and also listen to the sentiments of the people, and strengthen the internal core in Singapore. And very importantly, of course, there are many difficult challenges facing Singapore globally. And so for the government to be strong enough, to be nimble enough, and to have the necessary aptitude and wherewithal to navigate Singapore through those difficult challenges that Singapore faces as a country.
Yeah, you mentioned the global climate. A lot of analysts also looked at this as voter sentiment driven by this need to, or this flight to safety amidst so much global uncertainty, global challenges. Do you also agree with this view? It's rather a safe choice when they're faced with such uncertainties?
There is a degree to which the voters have gone for flight to safety, to go for a government that provides provides a pair of steady hands. Because you need that steadiness, you need that level-headedness to overcome challenges that are difficult to somehow and not easy, and it's sometimes you have to do it for the long haul. So I think that's where I would see the voter sentiments. They were voting for stability, they were voting for continuity, and they were voting for certainty. I mean, these three things are very important for the voters, as can be seen by the result. And that means that the government has remained intact. It is status quo from the election in terms of the seats that have been won or retained, and so the government is strong now, and it has been strong, and it remains strong now to deal with the challenges ahead of them.
You mentioned seats. I'm reminded of certain hot seats that were hotly debated on social media, looking at, I believe, Jalan Kayu and Punggol. Were these the results that you expected in some of these hot seats?
I think the hot seats were the ones that we had our eyes on, and certainly it did not disappoint. It was really, really close. And we can see the constituencies where between the People's Action Party, which is the ruling party, and the Workers' Party, which is the opposition that's had seats in Parliament, and now, of course, now it has seats as well. So we did expect there to be a close, an intense contest, a fierce contest, exactly what we saw. And I think one takeaway from that is that among the voters as well, while they seek a strong government, they also seek responsible and constructive opposition. And for the voters, based on the results that we've seen, their opposition party of choice is the Workers' Party.
Mm. On that note, about the Workers' Party, and going back just briefly on that point about safety, also echoing that sentiment was opposition leader Pritam Singh talking about that swing to PAP, partly driven by the current global and geopolitical climate, potentially influencing voters to look for or resort to safety. To what extent do you think these external geopolitical factors and tensions played a part in influencing voter sentiment this time around?
Elections in Singapore is a domestic affair. The focus is very much on bread and butter issues, and then the conditions by which where they stay, the place of living, and so on. So things that are very personal, issues that are very personal to the voter, and it remains the case in this particular election. But certainly, it has also been combined with what's happening globally as well. So it's certainly a factor what happens globally and the impact it has on Singapore, or it could have in Singapore. And Singapore is not immune to global challenges. So what happens globally can have a domestic impact, or domestic. There can be implications on domestic issues. So the intersection between global and domestic was also in the minds of voters, and I think certainly it would have been weighed in their calculations in terms of how they voted in this election.
We've discussed about the PAP, but what challenges do you think opposition parties faced in this election? What do you think of factors such as maybe resource constraints, legal issues perhaps? Did this play a role in impacting the performance, or was it something else?
Well, I think the elections in 2025, I think we've had a healthy exchange of ideas, having different positions on policies, and I think the opposition certainly had upped the game in Singapore in 2025. But this is the results that we see, and the opposition in Singapore is not monolithic. There are many political parties in the opposition camp. So within the opposition camp, the Workers' Party is certainly the opposition party of choice, and and as a result of that, they have retained the 10 seats that they had previously, and they've retained it in the 2025 GE, that is in Aljunied and Sengkang, as well as Hougang. But have also been able to clinch the 2 NCMP seats. These are non-constituency member of parliament seats. In other words, they did not win the election, but they were very close in winning the election. So they are the top 2, if you like, losers, not in a negative sense, in a positive sense. And with that, they are able to take on those seats. So in other words, in Parliament, there will be 12 seats that will be occupied by the Workers' Party. So that tells you the choice that people have made as far as the opposition party is concerned. So what happens to the rest of them? Now, the Singapore Democratic Party has also done well. Right? So of course, they are disappointed with the result, but they've also gave a good account of themselves. And so this is something that they can build on going forward. And it is a party that has been working the ground in Singapore for quite some time. There's also the Progress Singapore Party that contested in West Coast GRC, and that was also the one that many analysts were watching as well. Although they did not do as well as they did in 2020, it is still a party that's work in progress. Right? So the litmus test for these parties who did not clinch any seats Is how do they build on what they have done in 2025 and become better in subsequent elections. And we have other much smaller parties. They are newer parties. They are still learning and gaining political experience. They may stay, they may not stay, but we'll have to see when the next election comes, which is 5 years' time. So in 5 years is very long in politics and anything can happen. But right now, it seems quite clear that the people in Singapore desire a strong government that's led by the PAP and an effective, constructive, and responsible opposition in the form of the WP or Workers' Party.
Yeah, definitely a long way to go, but it's definitely interesting to look at how opposition politics in Singapore is developing, especially with what's happened this time around. Looking at the results that came out with the opposition and, obviously with the Workers' Party holding on to its foothold, what do you think this signals or this might indicate about the long-term prospects of opposition politics in the long term?
Well, the long-term prospects of opposition politics here, it's a bright one. It's promising. It's here to stay in Singapore. We have multiple political parties, and they all have an opportunity to contest in an election, and for the people to decide which of the parties and their candidates that they would like best to represent them in Parliament. So yes, I think opposition politics has a place in Singapore's political landscape. And as I had shared earlier, I think at the moment, because of the high standards that Singapore voters have for both the ruling party as well as the opposition, it seems at least in the current trajectory, the two parties of choice for the voting population is the People's Action Party as well as the Workers' Party. Of course, the People's Action Party or the PAP has been around for quite some time, and it is the only party that contested all the seats in Singapore, whereas the Workers' Party has contested less seats compared to the PAP, of course, and the rest of the seats were contested by the other political parties. But the direction that it has taken from this election is that the Workers' Party is the opposition party of choice, and they have an opportunity to build on that after this election.
With this in mind, I'm reminded of what some analysts have used to describe this outcome, as well as I think in previous elections as well. They've described this system as a 1.5 party system, and some would say it's gaining more traction in Singaporean politics. What do you think?
Yes, I think the 1.5 party system will depend very much on how the Workers' Party in particular performs. In other words, they will need to win more seats in subsequent elections to gradually move to a 1.5 party system. We are not a 2-party system in Singapore because the connotation from a 2-party system is either one of the parties should be able to form the government. But right now, the only party that's capable of forming the government is the People's Action Party, and that's the reason they've contested all the seats and they've got an overwhelming majority in Parliament. So what the Workers' Party is seeking to do is to gain more inroads into Parliament and to establish themselves as an effective and constructive opposition. And at this point in time, that's what their goal is, and that's also what the voting population in Singapore desires.
Do you think there are still maybe structural or societal barriers that might stand in the way of a more, I guess, diverse, more competitive nature in Singapore's political landscape? What would it take for us to see a truly competitive field?
I would say it is competitive already in Singapore. To be a member of Parliament in Singapore, the standards are pretty high. That's why the parties they're much smaller in size, and procurement policy are not as effective as the Workers' Party in the opposition camp. They were not able to make inroads into Parliament. So that tells you how competitive it is, and the standards are really high as far as the Singapore voter is concerned on who they want to cast their ballot for. So it's already competitive. And I think if, as far as making it even more competitive, that would depend very much on the recruitment policy and of the opposition parties, and in particular the Workers' Party. In fact, in 2025, the Workers' Party has been able to recruit some very impressive candidates, right, and also young candidates. So in other words, they're also building for the future. So if you look at that, it is competitive. I see it becoming even more competitive, but that depends very much on the recruitment policy of the political parties and the kind of candidates that they can field election after election.
So I want to look a bit beyond Singapore, going back to that point on this renewed mandate for the PAP under the leadership of Lawrence Wong. How might you see this influence relations between Singapore and Malaysia, especially in terms of areas of economic cooperation as well as joint infrastructure projects? We're seeing, of course, the SEZ as one of the biggest projects currently ongoing right now. How do you see this developing?
I think it's business as usual in Singapore-Malaysia relations or Malaysia-Singapore relations. And you have a prime minister who sees the relations with Malaysia as very important and pivotal to Singapore's foreign policy. So I think what has taken place prior to the election, whatever projects that has been negotiated, that has been signed, it will continue to be as it is, right? So it's business as usual. And I think for Prime Minister Lawrence Wong and his team, Malaysia is a very important partner to Singapore, and it is one that they will continue to want to strengthen relations with, because it brings mutual benefits to both countries. So I think as far as for Malaysians to understand here, I think for Singapore, the relations is very important, and I think what this election has also shown, that they believe in the government in terms of both the domestic policy but also the foreign policy. So if you look at Prime Minister Lawrence Wong and his team and the way that they have engaged their counterparts in Malaysia, I think we can safely say that the relations between Malaysia and Singapore will grow from strength to strength.
Yeah, going back to that note on foreign policy, with this fresh electoral mandate, how do you think Singapore is expected to position itself, not just in its relations with Malaysia, but in a bigger scale as well, in its regional role within ASEAN, when we're talking about regional stability, economic integration? Where do you see this going?
See, we have a fourth generation of ministers now in Singapore, but the experience that they've had in foreign policy, it's useful and important. And that experience will help them in terms of how to navigate Singapore's foreign policy and to further advance Singapore's national interest. Now, as far as ASEAN is concerned, Singapore is a staunch proponent of ASEAN. It wants ASEAN to continue to not just do well, but continue to do even better. It wants ASEAN to remain relevant. And I think Singapore will continue in this new, in this 4G, fourth generation team in Singapore. They see it similarly to their predecessors in that ASEAN is a cornerstone of Singapore's foreign policy. And the more the stronger ASEAN is, the better it is for Singapore.
Of course, we were already discussing about the current geopolitical climate, global issues as well, but obviously we can't ignore the elephant in the room when we're talking about geopolitical issues. Of course, we have to touch on the current situation with the US and China specifically. How do you think with these election results, this outcome, do you think this might affect Singapore's economic diplomacy strategies perhaps in dealing with these major powers?
I think Singapore recognizes that there is a global turbulence, particularly with regard to the Trump tariffs. So that's the reason they have set up a high-level task force. And one of those, part of the task force is Deputy Prime Minister Gan Kim Yong. And he was known as during the election as the task force man, right? To emphasize his importance to Prime Minister Lawrence Wong's team. So they have a task force, and whenever you have a high-level task force, it shows that Singapore is taking very seriously what's happening globally and to cushion the impact it has domestically. So what I would say right now is, because of what's going on around the world with the Trump tariffs and the impact that perhaps we may not really have seen right now, it may have a much more severe impact? We don't know at this point in time. So what Singapore is doing through this task force is to prepare for the worst to happen, but have the best hands to be able to deal with it.
Keeping these challenges in mind, both domestic and globally, and we were talking about what some of the takeaways, some of the lessons that should be learned from the past year, as well as this election for the PAP, and as well as under Lawrence Wong's leadership. What do you think the cabinet would look like?
I think the cabinet, because of what's happening around the world, I think there may well be more continuity in his cabinet, rather than having made more wholesale changes. But I think there are certain positions that will certainly need to be filled, and important positions. I think the first is, of course, of the Minister for Defense, right? So the defense portfolio is incredibly important to Singapore, as is the case in Malaysia and many other countries. It's a very important portfolio. So it's one of the ministries that Prime Minister Lawrence Wong would have to fill. Another is, of course, we have one of the Deputy Prime Minister, Heng Swee Keat, who did really well as Deputy Prime Minister. He's well respected. So he has stepped down and not contested in this election. And so that particular position also needs to be filled if the Prime Minister wants to have two Deputy Prime Ministers. Then, of course, there are newer faces that have come into the picture. They could potentially also assume political office, not necessarily a minister position, but other political office positions. There may also be existing political office holders that may get maybe promoted to take on even more roles. So any one of those things could happen. But I think the underlying ethos here is to keep the cabinet as stable, so that it can continue all the policies that it had prior to the election, so they can continue now that the election is over.
So continuity, do you think, is good for the forming of government then?
Absolutely. And I think if you have gotten your policy right, and it's the same, ain't broken, don't fix it. And I think the policies, by and large, if you look at it in terms of its foreign policy, it has got many things right. And I think it wants to continue that policy. So I think the policy, at the end of it, whatever policies that are churned out, is for the benefit of Singapore and Singaporeans. And I think that will be the direction that the new cabinet, as part of the government, will go.
Probably too soon, but in the near future, what do you think are some challenges or challenges that the cabinet should look out for, or maybe some low-hanging fruits as well?
I think in terms of challenges, it's the one that one could point to unpredictability of global events. Right? If sometimes we're not sure, and also uncertainty in terms of some direction of what the global events may go. And of course, we are also in the age of technology, disruption that's caused by technology. So how do we ride on technology to work for us in Singapore? And also, of course, the rise of artificial intelligence. Right. So those are some of the areas that the government will certainly be looking at. They're already looking at it, but I think they will look even more into it. And of course, it is really important to forecast potential challenges. So you may not have, you may not see it now, but it could happen in the future. So do a bit of scenario planning as well. So, but I think the immediate task for the government, now that the election is over, is to close the ranks, right, and rally the people in Singapore to strengthen the domestic core, so as to be able to deal effectively with difficult external challenges.
I believe that's all the time that we have today. Thanks so much for sharing your thoughts with us. Definitely interesting outcome. A lot of dynamics domestically and as well as internationally to look out for with Singapore's politics. Thank you so much. That was Dr. Mustafa Izzuddin, Senior Political Analyst at Solaris Strategies Singapore, sharing some insights on key takeaways of the Singapore's general election in the past weekend. So that's all that we have on Agenda Awani at this hour. With me, Nala Huda. We'll catch you another time.